Wait. Before we start, just want to make sure we're clear here. While this podcast talks about sobriety, mental health, and addiction, it is not meant to replace professional medical advice. Welcome to Sisters in Sobriety.
I'm Kathleen.
And I'm Sonia.
And we're ex-sisters-in-law, brought together in marriage and bonded through our sobriety journey.
Join us as we talk sobriety, addiction, and everything in between. You're in for quite a ride. And our Substack is buzzing with amazing content, from creative mocktail recipes to insightful courses and reflective exercises. There is something for everyone. Don't miss out. It's a great way to add some extra joy and depth to your journey. Check it out. Welcome to Sisters in Sobriety. Today we have Kristen McGuiness, bestselling author, storyteller, and coach.
Kristen's best-selling memoir, 5150, The Magical Adventures of a Single Life, chronicles her journey through 51 dates in 50 weeks as a sober 30-something in LA, navigating heartbreak, healing, and self-discovery.
Since then, she's become the CEO of Rise Literary and writes for outlets like the New York Times, Rolling Stones, and Marie Claire, and continues to explore the intersection of sobriety, dating, relationships, and sex.
Welcome.
Thanks, all. So glad to be here.
So let's start back in your 20s. What were your 20s like before sobriety? What were you chasing and what were you avoiding?
I was a mess. That was my 20s. I had a very messy 20s, and I got sober the first time at 27. And then had a very brief relapse when I was 29, and then got sober at that point and have been sober since. I'll be celebrating 19 years of sobriety in October. So if anyone wants to do the math, I am no longer in my 20s. But yeah, I definitely was not a high bottom drunk. I mean, I ended up getting sober with a job. I actually worked in the film industry in LA. I was a D girl. I was working for a production company with Warner Brothers. And prior to that, I worked in book publishing as a book editor. So I always had these like pretty fancy day jobs where I got to work with fun people and go fun places. And then I had this very different nightlife where I would end up in very compromising positions with like an AK-47 on my lap, smoking crack with transgender sex workers. So yes, I was like, I was not a high bottom drunk. I would always end up in like the weirdest, like messed up, drug-fueled scenarios. I did drugs as well as drink. And so I sort of always got myself into these wild, my other friends would go home and I would sort of find the weirdest party I could to attend. And I would be there though in like, J. Crew corduroy pants. And, this is back in the days of ballet slippers and like tweed ballet slippers and like my merino wool sweater, smoking crack. So...
Quite an image you paint.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I look like this. So I always sort of looked more innocent than, what I was doing. But anyhow, so it was a time. That was my 20s. So
So Kristen, what was the moment or like series of moments that made you realize you couldn't continue to live the way you were living?
I mean, besides pawning automatic weapons for more crack in Hollywood at 7 a.m. in the morning. I mean, those are, they were not mine, by the way. They were someone else's. But I was like, I was just visiting.
You're selling them to the Ukrainians.
Yeah, totally. No, I mean, like anybody, it was a series of things. Not every night looked like that, obviously. A lot of nights were not as exciting. And it was just me feeling really lonely and sad and just feeling like nothing was changing. But, like with most people, I had a series of events. I was dating somebody who was, I was madly in love with and really saw a future with. And they were like, yeah, I love you too. But like, I can't handle this level of partying. Like he was visiting he was the visitor in my crazy world. And he was like, this is fun. But like, I have a day job too. He also worked in the film industry. And then, I remember going to a wedding with my friends from college out in New York, and we were all partying, and everybody was like, oh my God, I haven't partied like this in years. And I was like, I haven't partied like this since Tuesday, and it was just this beginning to recognize that like everybody else around me was growing up and I wasn't. And so, I spent that fall, this is 2004, a long time ago. I spent that fall, trying to drink and use normally, as they say. And I would try to go out and just have one drink. And, I remember a night, this is, celeb name drop, but I was friends with Chelsea Handler at that time. She was very new in her career. And we had gone out to get like a couple of drinks. And I was driving home from that couple. It was one of my tester nights. And I was driving home from a couple of drinks and I was like, just go home, just go home, just go home. And then I couldn't. It was like my car just drove itself to the next bar where like the friends would be. That always led to like more debauchery. And I had like a big work day the next day. Like I think I might have even had like a job interview or something, but something that I needed to go home for. And I didn't. I ended up being out partying until 6 a.m. And it was just kind of one of those things where it was like, I cannot, like once I put one or two drinks in me, all bets are off and I don't know where it's going to take me.
So what did getting sober look like for you? Like, was there structure or support system that helped you actually stop?
Yeah, I mean, I got sober in 12-step. I mean, that's where I ended up. So around that same time, the boyfriend who I was in love with broke up with me, and I went to a therapist because all my friends were tired about hearing about him. So I was like, great, I'll pay somebody to hear about him. And they were like, we're done now, Kristen. And I was like, okay, great. Therapy. It's like
Kathleen's nodding her head because she wants me to start paying her.
Because I'm a therapist. And I'm like, interesting.
Yeah. So I was like, okay, I'll pay this lady to hear about him. And thankfully that lady was an angel. And she told me that before she was willing to see me again, she wanted me to try 3 meetings, AA, DA, and CA, Alcoholics Anonymous, or not DA, NA, Narcotics Anonymous, and Cocaine Anonymous. And see where I felt like I fit in most. And I felt very comfortable in CA to start with because cocaine was so clearly a problem. It was hard for me to see that alcohol was at first, but I knew I had a coke problem. Like that was kind of like I knew that one. So I started going to those meetings and, I really struggled to get sober. I would go to a CA meeting every Friday night and I would drive home and buy 2 bottles of $2 Chuck at Trader Joe's and then go and party. And I would have like a big book and I'd be like doing coke with all my friends. And I'd be like, wait, let me read you this passage of the big book. And they'd be like, please don't, Kristen, no. It's like, nothing harshes a vibe more than somebody reading, pages of the big book to you while you're high on cocaine. And then I have a very sort of wild and colorful childhood in history. My father was actually a drug smuggler and was one of the biggest marijuana smugglers of the 1970s. And in these last years of my using, there was a lot of trauma around him. He was in and out of, he had been in prison for about 20 years for drug smuggling, and he was released and he went right back into the business. And so he kept getting like caught and brought back in and caught and brought back in. But at this point, he was like in his late 50s, early 60s. And like the prison gets really tired of having Bureau of Prisons does not like nonviolent criminals in their late 50s and early 60s because they have a lot of health problems. So they literally kept trying to like get him out and he would just like show back. He would just like wind up back there again. So I was in Florida. I was actually his character witness before like another trial. And I went to go see my uncle before that. And my uncle had been out in LA with me about a month prior and had seen how I was partying. And basically my 2 uncles did an intervention and they said, we know the difference between a party and a problem, and you have a problem. And we want you to get clean. And so they offered that I could move in with either one of them. One lived in Florida, the other lived in Dallas, where I was raised. And they offered me free room and board and, the space to get clean. And I went to Tallahassee to be the character witness for my father. And I got really loaded and had a really just gnarly experience in Tallahassee. And I was like, I visited my father in prison. It was a really rough weekend. And I came home and decided I would move back to Dallas, my hometown, and I would get sober. And so I really committed. And that's when I started a 12-step program for real. And I got my first sobriety date, March 15th, 2005.
Did you, because of the age you were when you got sober, I was 38 when I got sober, so things were like going downhill. Were you worried at all that you would be giving up fun? Like you'd have to completely rewire your life and the way you kind of socialized and like experienced your non-work hours?
Yeah, I mean, certainly. I mean, I didn't know what fun in sobriety was. I mean, I had been drinking and using since I was 17 pretty consistently. In my
Hmm.
college years, like I was a partier, like there are those people in college who were like the partiers, and that was my group of friends. So the idea of sobriety and fun was just terrifying. For anyone listening, though, what I discovered was like I ended up having so much fun in sobriety. And I think even more than other people did because I just lucked out. I moved home to Dallas. I ended up becoming friends with a group of women. Almost all of us are still sober that I know of, which is amazing over 20 years later. And I think it's because we basically built a foundation of fun in sobriety. So we would go clubbing, I mean, sober. We would go clubbing until like 3 o'clock in the morning because we had all this energy, right? Like you get sober and you don't know what to do with yourself. So we would in Dallas, we would go to these nightclubs. People would be like, what are you people on? We would get dressed up in like crazy costumes. We would have costume parties. Like we would go to bars and dress up like in wigs. And my friend Eileen and I, we would dress up as these characters, Dolly and Polly. And we would go, I would wear a hot pink wig and she would wear an electric blue wig. And then we wore like black and white stockings with like an all black outfit to these very preppy bars in Dallas. And people would be like, who are these freaks? And we just loved it. Like, and so we had these weird hair extensions we would wear with like ski goggles, and we would go to clubs and we just like had so much fun. It was like we really reconnected to our childhoods and just being like
Hmm.
fun and silly. And so for me, that just married. I mean, in the same way that, later I had a sponsor who said, like, we go to meetings every day to train our feet when we're new in sobriety. I also really had this thing that, like, I went to bars and clubs early in sobriety because I trained my feet on how to have fun and stay sober. So,
Hmm.
the idea of going to a bar was never a weird thing. I mean, my husband is also long term sober. We always have alcohol in our house for friends. Like that idea of being afraid of alcohol is like just never been part. He had a very similar, like early sobriety. He got sober working in a bar. And so, like, and having fun, and just never seeing that you had to give up and we were like in our 20s, right? So never feeling like we had to give up like our 20s to be sober. I still went out to bars and, met boys and had fun and went on dates and went to clubs and just like was really able to marry those two things.
That's amazing. It's not something I hear very often,
No.
actually, that people are able to do that. So that's incredible that you were just like, I'm going to make my own fun. Were you ever tempted by going to still going to bars when you're trying to maintain your sobriety?
Not really. I mean, I think had I been doing that alone, yes, but I was going there with a lot of girls, so I think that's like the biggest piece about getting sober, especially when you're young. I mean, at any age, right? It's all about community and really having people that you connect with and have fun with. So, like, we were all there together. It didn't really matter. Like, the peer pressure was to stay sober, the peer pressure wasn't
Hmm.
to drink. So the drink really didn't look that interesting because we were having so much fun without it. It just really
Hmm.
removed that desire. And I think like really rewired our brains in a really beautiful way that we just never saw that we needed it to have fun because we were having so much fun without it. And like I say, that just built a whole foundation. I mean, me and my sober crew now, years into our sobriety, years into marriage and parenthood, we still get together and do karaoke and we like go, it's like our thing. Like once every few months, we will find the time to like go to karaoke. We go to karaoke bars. We all sing like dead cold sober in front of like audience. Like I later in my second round of sobriety moved back to LA and found a very similar group of people in sobriety in LA where we just like all had so much fun together that like the idea that we needed a drink to do it just wasn't necessary.
Well, that's amazing. I love that you found that path. And I'm really hearing you that like community helped ground you basically through that time.
Yeah, and I think no matter where you are in your recovery and your sobriety, I mean, community is the key piece of it. If you're
Hmm.
alone in it, it's really hard to stay sober because you're lonely and
Hmm.
and you're going to go back to the things that gave you comfort. But if you find community, then you find comfort in that community and then the drink and the drug just don't seem as tempting, but also you're able to begin to build a whole new life in recovery that
Hmm.
does feel I mean, I've always said this, that like, I think at a certain point in my recovery wasn't about abstaining from drugs and alcohol. Recovery was about loving life sober. And that's still true for me today. Like, I love that I get to be a sober parent. Like, I love that I get to experience the joys of parenthood completely sober. And not that
Yeah.
it isn't, I have a 6-year-old and a 10-year-old. Not that there aren't moments of frustration where you wish you could take the edge off, but I'm like, what would that really do? Right? I mean,
Yeah.
would it allow me to navigate this stress any better? No. Would it allow me to be more present to whatever they're going through? Definitely not. So, though it might take an edge off for me a little bit, at the end of the day, I would really be doing a disservice both to myself and to them in our relationship as parent and child to be numbing that experience. So yeah, I mean, my husband and I have both been through a lot in sobriety. And I will say, I don't think either of us have ever thought it was going to be made better by a drink.
Right. Right. We're going to switch gears a little bit and talk
Yeah.
about dating and
Yeah.
relationships. So in 5150, you made a pact to go on 51 dates sober. What
Mhm.
spurred that decision and what did it represent for you?
Well, it's so funny now. All these years later, I've been married for 13 years. But no, at the time, when I got sober, I had already been single for quite some time. I mean, I had that like, in love moment prior to getting sober, but it was a very short fling. I really hadn't had a serious relationship in years. And then I got sober and I stayed single. And so I was at that point, I mean, I basically gone my entire 20s. I was then 30 and I still, I hadn't had a boyfriend in a very long time at that point. I was also a writer, so that was true. I had been working in book publishing for years. Then I worked in film development. I had written a bunch of screenplays. I had yet to have anything sell or be produced. And so I decided I wanted to write a book. And I thought, well, what a better deal than to write a book about trying to get a boyfriend. And by the end of it, maybe I'll get a book deal or a boyfriend. I ended up with both, but not not directly. And so I set out to, go on a date a week and write a book about it. But what I'll always say about 5150, and I do think it's what makes it different and special, is that early on in the book, I actually started dating somebody kind of, quasi seriously. I liked him a lot. And then we broke up after maybe about a month. And he's in the book, he's a character in the book. And I had a boss at the time who said, I want to set you up with somebody. And I thought she meant a date, and it wasn't. It was her therapist. And I
Uh-huh.
began to see this therapist who is still my therapist to this day. I just had a session with her yesterday. I mean, it's been almost 20 years. And she was both a therapist, but also she was a shamanic healer. She had been trained in Peru and was a curandera. And so I began doing all of this really deep, I was doing talk therapy the way I had done for years. If your father is in prison for 20 years of your life, you end up in
Mhm.
therapy sooner than other people.
Mhm.
So I think at 16 is when my mom like put me in therapy. But I had never done any kind of like metaphysical energy work. I mean, this is 2007. Some of this is a little bit more common now. Like we
Right.
pull tarot cards and oracle decks, but at that time, laying on the ground doing vision work with stones in my hands was not a common practice. And so I made that part of the book as well. And then I began to go on these dates with my family members, including towards the end of the book, my father. It was the one time I saw him ever out of prison. He passed away in 2009 after I had written him and right before the book, about a year before the book came out. But so that ended up being like our lone date. So, the dates ended up at one point, somebody actually asked me, like, well, what constitutes a date then? And I said, anything that brings me closer to true love. And so the book was both about the dates, because I go on a lot of first dates and a few second and third dates, but it was also about these other ways in which I was finding healing and really beginning to grow as a woman who was new in recovery, who only had a year
Mhm.
back, who was just trying to find my way in the world again and how to be a grown up and how to show up for a relationship and, ultimately wrote that book about it.
You talk about dating, I know all about this, the wrong kinds of men.
Yeah.
How did you start spotting red flags that maybe you would miss when you weren't sober?
So it's so funny, in prior to sobriety, I had a couple of really fantastic boyfriends that were like amazing. And then I got sober, and then I just was like dating bad guys. I was like, what? How did this? But I think to a certain extent, like sobriety really like uncovered a lot of my shit, you know? And so in my drinking and using, I think I was almost more intuitive. But once I got into sobriety, I really didn't know what I wanted. And, and so I ended up really having to redefine that for myself of like what I was looking for. I mean, I think I've been better than most at spotting red flags. I had one bad boyfriend prior to getting sober who literally is serving time again in San Quentin. Like he's that bad of a boyfriend. He's like, I think he's under a 3 strikes and you're out situation now. But other than that, like all my boyfriends, starting with my first boyfriend in high school, were like the loveliest people who I'm still friends with all of them, which is so weird, but I am. Um, and but then when I was writing 5150, I really began to have to like question, like, what had kept me single for so long and what was I looking for? And I will say, like, I had, probably the worst template for a boyfriend out of my father was like the consummate, Romeo who never showed up. He was in prison for most of my life. He would send me these like love letters from prison. Then he finally gets out of prison and he just goes right back to the business. Like he could never be a present father. I later really came to appreciate how lucky I was, though I'm sad for him that he had such a terrible prison sentence. The fact that he wasn't in my life actually gave me the space to build healthier relationships with men. And my mother's 2 brothers, those uncles who sat me down and got me sober, really were my templates for a good man. And they were the ones who raised me. And they didn't even have to. They weren't my parents. They had no obligation to show up. But they both showed up so consistently throughout my childhood. They were the ones who ended up walking me down the aisle when I got married. And I really, I joke that my husband is like, if you put those 2 men together in a blender and mix them up, that would be my husband, both in his best parts and his worst parts. I don't, I always say I do have a hard marriage. I don't have the world's easiest marriage. My husband is, he's in recovery and he has a lot of his shit too that he brings to the table and unprocessed trauma. And he has a rougher story and a rougher childhood than I did. But nonetheless, he's a really good man. And I think that I chose, I did actually have a nose for really good men because I was raised by really good men. And those were, my uncles and not necessarily my father. Throughout 5150, though, I definitely like navigated more red flag guys, though, because I think that, in early recovery, like we don't know who we are. And we're really redefining that for ourselves, and I will say my husband and I have begun to move away from each other a bit in our marriage because I think I am finally growing up into the person that like I was really meant to be. And like, it takes time, I had a challenging and traumatizing childhood. I spent 10 solid years, drinking and using, and I really just started to grow up at the age of 29, and so I've always sort of joked that I'm like 10 years behind. And I think now I'm finally like I feel closer to, I'm going to be 48 in a month. I feel closer now to 48 than I ever have felt close to the age I was about to turn in my life in terms of where I am, everywhere in my life right now. So yeah, I think that recovery really is an act of maturing and that takes time in all our relationships.
Wow. So what was your most surprising takeaway from that year of dating? I have had a year of dating and I don't have enough distance to have a healthy perspective. So what was the most surprising? My takeaway right now is humanity is not in good shape. But what was your takeaway from your year of dating?
So I will say this. I think, I wrote that book a long time ago and dating has changed so much since then. We were just at the beginning of internet dating. It was still kind of like almost a taboo to internet date, where now it's just common practice, right? And I think internet dating, because it's offered so much anonymity to people, it's also allowed for a lot of bad behavior. It's like trolling on the internet, people just allow their facelessness to give them like free, reign to behave badly, which I guess goes to show that that was probably always there. But, it certainly didn't show up in the same ways that it does now, where like so many of my friends feel traumatized by the dating process. I think for me, I was less traumatized. I think I was really more, and I do think it's different. I will say this. There was a point in 5150 that I think changed everything for me, which was that and it's what influenced the subtitle of that book, The Magical Adventures of a Single Life, was that embracing being single was actually like the great joy of my dating experience. That dating wasn't about finding the guy, that dating was really about having fun and celebrating my time being single. And that, like, the more time I had to do that, the less expectation and pressure I would put on these dates to be successful or to turn out the way I think I wanted them to, which also made me not be so obsessed with the guy being the right one and allowed me to have some distance from, like, hey, is he? Because if he isn't, it's not that big of a deal because I'm having so much fun anyway. I don't freaking care if he's the right one or not, you know? So, and I remembered at one point I was actually in a meeting and a woman saying, you know, she was like, I remember when I was newly sober and I was living in a studio apartment and it was just me and I felt so lonely and I couldn't wait to have the husband and the kids and the dog in the house. And she was like, and now I have the husband and the kids and the dog in the house. And God, I would kill to be alone in a studio apartment. And I really took that to heart. And I thought to myself, you know what? One day I am going to have the dogs and the kids in the house and the husband. And I'm going to really miss this. You know, I'm going to miss this time being single. And I want to embrace it now. And so I think that was really my big takeaway of how I changed in that book. And then, you know, I finished that book. I sold that book about, let me see, it was about 2 months before that book was supposed to come out. And I ended up hooking up with a friend of mine. And that friend of mine became more than a hookup. He became a boyfriend and then he became a fiance. And now he's a husband and the father of my children. And I think like that all happened because I stopped freaking out. And I was just like, you know what? Like, I'm going to enjoy this being single bit and like not feel the need to seek out the next person and just like really love this era of my life.
Yeah, I share that approach. Like after I divorced from Sonia's brother, my ex-husband, I spent a year single and I had the best time dating. I had the best time because
Yeah.
I wasn't looking for a relationship. I just wanted to have fun. And I really think that shifted everything for me.
I don't mind being single, but I don't like dating. I'd rather be alone than go on 10 dates.
Well, I think, at least for me, I began to see the dates as like, you know what? I'm just going out and meeting somebody. And like, if it's, I can get up and leave, right? Like, I think it's just like beginning to like remove that expectation around what it's supposed to be and just letting it be like, and like, obviously, if you don't even want to do it, you know, like, don't do it either. I mean, I think like we get in our heads that like we have to do or be something that we don't have to do and be. You know, recently my marriage, we're getting an apartment, a studio, because I wanted a studio. But I'm like, you know what? I'd like a studio apartment to go hide out in. But my husband and I are in a hard marriage, but we want to stay married. Like we have a 6-year-old and a 10-year-old, and we don't want to get divorced yet. Like I suspect we will at some point. I'm not really into marriage for a lifetime anyway. I just think that's so boring. I told my husband that at the beginning. I was like, look, buddy, do not expect forever out of this. Like that, I am not that kind of person. I still want to go have fun. I want to go and pick up men at a bar in my 60s in Paris, like with Louboutins on. Like, okay, I have plans here. And so I also want to be married and have a family. And like, we're best friends. My husband is my best friend. But it was really hard to continue living together, knowing that like, this is hard. So we recently rented a studio apartment down by the beach. It's going to be called the Beach House. My husband is going to be there 4 nights a week. I'm going to be there 1 night a week. We're going to be together 2 nights a week. And I'm like, we might just do this for the next 5 years of our marriage. I just think like, I was talking to my 93-year-old grandmother about it yesterday. I'm like, I just don't think we need to be beholden by any rules or old expectations of what we think we're supposed to do as women, especially in the world of love and, you know, marriage and romance. It's like, whatever works, just do that, you know?
I think different things work for different couples. Like I'm a couples therapist, so I definitely know that different things work for different couples.
I mean, I am shocked at the number of people on their dating profile that are ethically non-monogamous. Shocked. Like easily 10%.
Yeah.
People.
Well, and I think people are just realizing that like they want to be in partnership with somebody. They love them. but they just don't want to be with them consistently. And they're trying to figure out how to navigate that. I mean, my husband and I both decided like we're not interested in like an open sexual relationship just because that gives us the heebie jeebies. And it creeps us out to be with somebody else and come and be in the family bed. We joked, I feel like 2 homes is our version of an open relationship because it just gives us the independence and freedom we need to like be happy in our marriage. But I think it's the same for dating. Dating is the same way that I think the less we hold on to these old expectations and the more we begin to redefine what it really means for us, the better experience and more fun we get to have. So I'm all about fun.
Back to the
Yeah.
dating piece. What role did sex play in dating for you? Like, was it an expectation, a connection, something else? Was it important for you?
I mean, sex was a lot more important for me back then than it is now. I'm good. I'm tapped out. I had enough sex. I mean, I'm definitely not typical in, I mean, I wasn't then either. I always had I was always able to compartmentalize meaningful sex
Mhm.
versus non-meaningful sex. So, and it's funny. I grew up in the Catholic Church. I had a lot of shame from my family around sex. And at a certain point, like I got very punk rock about it. There were people who, if I liked them and I wanted sex to be part of an emotional connection, then it would be more meaningful and maybe something I would hold out on, or maybe something that I would want to develop a relationship a little bit further before I did it because I just didn't want to feel like that I was going to risk having sex and not getting more out of the relationship. And I think that's the thing. I think sometimes we do just have sex. And I see this even now with friends in their 30s and early 40s where the sex comes so fast that there isn't the space to get to know somebody. And when they like that person and that person leaves, they sort of missed out on that courtship period that might have taken the
Yeah.
relationship further. There are also people that honestly I have met and I would never want to date, but I totally wanted to bang. And I think for me, I always had a friend, the author Jen Pasteloff, and she's like, I don't understand how you can enjoy having sex with a stranger. And I'm like, oh my God, it's like the best. Because there's like no, like, I do not want them to call me the next day. I did not want anything more from the relationship. I didn't have to even have that in my brain. And it could be this really awesome carnal experience of just wild desire because I wasn't like, I didn't give a shit what happened, you know? And so I was famous, like in college, they called me the hunter because I would walk into like a room and I would see the guy on the other side of the room and I'd be like, I'm going to fuck him tonight. And my friends would be like, Kristen. And everybody thought that would end in sobriety, but it never did. I would be dead cold sober and we walk into a bar and I'd be like, I'm going to fuck him. And my friends would be like, that's dead. And I usually would because that's not a hard thing. If a guy is single and you're like, hey, you want to fuck tonight? They're like, okay. But I would know immediately this is not somebody who, again, I feel like I always had a pretty good intuitive guide on these things. It was never somebody who I wanted a relationship with. If I saw somebody who I thought was interesting that I really wanted to get into a friendship and a partnership with, I would not have that urge. You know, I would actually want to build something and learn to, get to know them better. Ironically, I did have sex with my husband the first time we ever hooked up, but we had been friends for 3 years at that point. So like we also like we had that. Yeah, it was a combination of both where I was like, I'm gonna have sex with that guy, but also I'm super good friends with him. And our relationship just like turned very quickly from one of like really loving. I mean, we had a really loving and lovely friendship. And then one day I just saw him. We were both in a meeting and I looked at him from across the meeting and I was like, him. And just all of a sudden it was like Cupid's arrow hit, you know?
Huh. I love that. So what does intimacy mean to you now and how has that evolved?
I mean, we've been together for 15 years and I would say there's not a lot anymore. I mean, it's part of one of the reasons that our marriage is, we've had a really hard marriage. My husband has severe unmedicated ADHD. And I say he has a severe case of ADHD. I have a severe case of being 47 years old. And like the things that I could ignore or manage when we were younger and didn't have as much responsibility on our plate have really changed, And so my husband is awesome. My husband is really one of the most special people I've ever met in my life. And I'll get teary-eyed saying that. Like, I love him so much as a person, truly. we were driving yesterday to drop my daughter off at camp. And it's like this twisty, turny road. We live up in Ojai, California, about an hour and a half north of LA. And so it's like these kind of mountainous roads. And there had been a construction truck that had dropped all this debris. So there were these huge pieces of bricks in the middle of this 2-lane freeway, but still, and debris, all this stuff. And my husband pulls the car over on the way back from dropping our daughter off at camp, gets out into the middle of the freeway, and starts removing all the debris himself, like by hand, just like chucking everything out of the way. And then like I got out to help him because I didn't want him to get hit. So I'm like flagging down cars as they're approaching him, so that they could maneuver around him. But like, he just like, that's who he is. Like, that's who he, like, he's just like, and I've always said that, like, if ever there was an apocalypse, like there's only one person I know I would want to go through that with. Like my husband is, one, we would survive. But also, he's just such a compassionate, caring, amazing person. There are so many people who are alive and sober today because of him. He's totally that person who would walk up to any newcomer and we always protect women in meetings. Like the way I met him is I was a newcomer and he was like, "Hi, you're new here." And I was like, "Oh, he's cute." And he was like, "Meet my girlfriend, Karen." And I became friends with Karen. Karen loves us. There was never any drama around that. They had broken up long before we ever got together. And she was like, "Oh my God, I always wanted Terry to marry someone special." And so, he's an amazing person. That said, he's also an amazing person with severe ADHD. And when you're trying to live life and pay bills and, have a clean house and manage 2 children and, all of these things. And I run I run a big company, a book publishing house, Rise Literary. We do book coaching and hybrid publishing. My days are busy. I truly I suddenly feel like, I'm like, how did I become a CEO? But I am, running a 7-figure business. And so, in all of that, yeah, it's hard to be intimate with somebody who you feel like doesn't really get to show up as a man and who ends up becoming another child, which I think happens, it's like Sabrina Carpenter's man-child, right? It happens in a lot of our
Happens a lot.
relationships. Yeah, where it's hard to be sexually attracted to your third child. You shouldn't be, I always say he's like a 17-year-old boy and it's hard to be attracted to a 17-year-old boy, even, when he is an amazing partner and friend. So, so intimacy has changed a lot. And, I'm always open to my husband's growth and being able to show up. And as I've said to him, I'm so busy. I don't want to have sex. I don't want to date right now. Honestly, when I see my friends who are dating and it's like, oh, is he going to call? Am I going to get the text? Like all of that energy that dating takes up in your mind, because it does, right? It's like a section of your brain. And it's like, I want to be really present to my children right now. And I want to be really present to my work. And I still want to have time to have fun and go out with my girls and do all the fun things that we do and be, late women in their late 40s who most of my friends are sober. But we still go to posh places and hang out and have fun. And I want to do all those things. I don't want to be caught up thinking, is a man going to call? I know a man is going to call. He's my husband. He calls me all the time. So yeah.
So you're a mom. We talked about you have 2 children, 6 and 10. How has motherhood reframed your view of relationships and of recovery?
Oh, one, I am eternally grateful for being a mother in sobriety. As I said at the beginning, I don't think it would ever have made any day easier in my life as a mother. And, raising 2 small children is hard. It's stressful.
Yeah.
We all lose our shit at some point. We've also had children throughout pandemic. We had young children. Dylan was 1 and Ella was 5 when the pandemic started. And those years were really hard, right? We were all trapped together. Dylan didn't sleep for the first 3 years. My poor husband and I, we were in a pandemic and sleep deprived. Yeah. And, trying to run a business and just, we had a lot of family travesty throughout pandemic. One of my uncles who raised me passed away and my husband's mother passed away. And then my husband's father passed away. So we have been in that cycle that happens when you're in your 40s and 50s. Parents everybody starts dying and you're managing that too, and small children. And I take care of my 93-year-old grandmother. She has a caretaker, but I'm here. She lives in town with us. And so I do all of that on top of these 2 little people. I can't imagine managing all of that and drinking. I just can't. I just can't. I don't see a world in which that's healthy. I don't see a world in which I get to really connect with them. And there was a speaker I once heard years ago who said that if you turn over anything in my house, including my children, at the bottom of it, it'll say property of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I cry every time I share that because it is so true. They are here because I got sober, and I get to stay present to that gift through my sobriety. Um, and it is truly like one of the reasons why I do want to stay married. My husband, he had his parents were together throughout his childhood, and he has a sibling, a younger brother. So, he got the experience of a family with two parents, two kids, but I didn't. I never got that. I was an only child. My father was in prison. My mother worked all the time, and I was raised by the grandmother that I now take care of. So I never got to have that nuclear family experience. And I love giving that to my kids. I love family, even when they're stressful, because some of them are, right? But I love family vacation. I love when the four of us are out having fun. I love going for bike rides and hikes and going to the beach. And I really I love the fun with my family, and I love giving that to them. And that's why, yes, there might be another relationship down the road that brings me the intimacy and romance and the sweep me off my feet that I don't get in my present relationship. But I am committed to my marriage because I am committed to that family. And I'm committed to getting to do it in recovery. I mean, that's another piece. My husband is sober. So, my kids have known AA for a very long time, but I always say, and not that my husband and I don't argue about parenting, because we have, the screen is a big debate in our house. My husband is very much like, no screens. And I'm like, that's not fair. But there's a lot spiritually that my husband and I agree on, because we both have our spiritual formation in a 12-step program, and we share spiritual principles. And that's what we share with our children. Like our son, our 6-year-old, was in the back seat yesterday watching us clear the road. That's the model of service and recovery that they see every day in their lives.
Yeah.
My daughter, we've already seen it like years ago. My daughter made friends with this boy, and we'd heard all about him. She was in first grade. So it was like Luca, her boyfriend. We didn't know who Luca was. Luca comes to her birthday party. We discovered that, Luca's on the spectrum. Luca's pretty much nonverbal. Nobody in the classroom had befriended Ella's best friend. Still to this day, he's Ella's best friend. I'm now best friends with Luca's mom. We go on vacation together. We're all very close. But that was because Ella was the kind of child who was generous to see past differences. They call her the Luca whisperer. She was generous enough to see past differences and embrace a child who she has such a deep bond with, And so I say that's a gift of sobriety. We're raising kids who have just this exceptional vocabulary around generosity and service. And we got that vocabulary from 12-step. And so, it's one of the reasons why people might look at our marriage and be like, oh, Kristen, I'd like for you to have something more. But what they don't see is how much I get by sharing a family and a faith, really, that's born out of being sober.
So speaking of recovery and service, which is part of your sobriety, what does sobriety look like for you today? Do you attend meetings? What is your self-care? How do you stay sober when you're balancing so many different roles now?
So I don't really go to meetings anymore, which is not to say that I won't again. And I always say this. I mean, you could see how emotional I am about what I've gotten out of 12-step meetings. I will forever be grateful. I would not be alive right now. I mean, I know that. I would have died without that. And so I'm forever grateful to the program. And I also know that at this point in my life, it just doesn't fit in the schedule. And to continue to try and then be mad at myself because I didn't, I began to feel like I was trying to diet, right? Oh, I'm going to start on Monday and then not do it and then be shaming myself that you should have gone. And, and then I was like, no, it's okay. I'm sober. I'm not going anywhere. And I know that. I have a community. Pretty much 90% of my friends are sober or barely drink. It's not even a big deal. I have 2 girlfriends, mom friends who drink. But when I go out with them, one of them will only have 1 drink ever. I'm always like, do you not want more? What's wrong with you? It's like, get this lady another. But there's just not a thing to them. So it's, and especially nowadays, I will say, being sober is so different now. I can always order a mocktail. I mean, I don't drink NA wine because I think that just is weird. Every once in a while, I'll have a sip of an NA beer, just if it's something special. My husband loves NA beer. and he's super stoked on all the choices he has today. But really, for me, it's like I could still go out and have a good time and a great meal and a mocktail and feel like I'm just part of the crew. So, I have such a fantastic group of women, though, around me who are sober and are in recovery, and some attend meetings, some don't. So, again, I think the two pieces that I always got from recovery was, having community and having a spiritual program. I've worked the 12 steps, and that cleared a lot out of my life. It allowed me to see my own side of the street. A lot of those early tools of the program I use all the time. I try to be somebody who says when I fucked up. I mean, running a company, I feel like is a lot of that. I really always try to own my side of the street. I could have, done this better, and also hold accountability where it's necessary. I mean, I expect that in turn. I really believe in honesty. My husband and I were talking about this yesterday because I caught him lying to somebody, and I was like, I don't lie. I just don't. I was a really big liar when I was using, and it's just a real hard no for me. And it's not to say that there aren't times where I have, but I really work every day just to never lie, So I think having those foundational pieces of a spiritual and an ethical program really helped to keep me sober, because that's, to me, the slippery slope of, I always say it's like working the steps backwards. You begin to stop taking responsibility, you start lying, you start losing your faith in a higher power. And then suddenly you get back to step one and you don't think you're powerless over alcohol or that your life is unmanageable, and then you're like, oh, I was fine. What was I thinking? And so I think for me, those things are so integrated into my life. And then having a spiritual program, which I do, and I continue. I just came back from a spiritual retreat in Ireland with one of my authors, Gertrude Lyons, who wrote the book Rewrite the Mother Code, which is a fantastic book. And she was doing a self-mothering retreat in Ireland, and we did all this shamanic spirituality and working with the fairies. And I mean, it was amazing, and that maintains that spiritual program for me. So I really think those are the pieces of recovery and of sobriety that keep us sober. And, one day, being back in meetings will probably be a part of it. I have no doubt, when there's more time in my schedule. But for today, it's just not necessary.
Thank you so much,
All right.
Kristen.
No,
It was
thank
such a
you.
pleasure to hear you and hear your perspective and some of your journey. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on. Have a beautiful day.
Thank you. And thank you all for joining Sisters in Sobriety, and we will see you next week.
This was Sisters in Sobriety.
Thank you for listening and being with us today.
If you want to learn more about sobriety and meet your community, find us at sistersinsobriety.substack.com.
Are you a sister in sobriety? Then reach out on social media. We'd love to hear from you.
If you're feeling generous, leave us 5 stars and a review, and follow us wherever you listen.
You'll never miss an episode. Until next time.